Everybody knows how Batman was created in the comics, which is why every time that a kid says, "Oh, I want to be Batman," kid gets some pretty funny looks from their parents. But what everybody doesn't know is who created Batman. I mean, most people know, if like they know anything about Marvel, the main person who's like done a lot of things for Marvel, like created Spider-Man and many other superheroes, and the name you would say is Stan Lee. But what about Batman? He's like pretty much the most popular, or at least one of the most popular superheroes in the world, but not many people know who actually created him or what his like real life history is. So I'm just going to be explaining that in this video. So Batman is one of the comic book characters with the largest history in comic books. He was created in 1939 during the so-called Golden Age of comics, and his books have remained in publication to the present day without interruption. Milo. So, the original concept of Batman was developed by writer slash artist Bob Kane, inspired by Sherlock Holmes, Zorro, a Leonardo da Vinci sketch of a Batwing flying machine, and his own imagination. Kane stretched an early version of the character. Looks like my cat wants to be in the video. Taking his idea to writer Bill Finger, they further developed the concept. Finger himself said on more than one occasion that Kane did indeed create a version of the character before Finger got involved with the project. Kane was inspired by The Flying Machine of Leonardo da Vinci, a movie he had seen called The Bat, and of course, Bela Lugosi's 1931 film Dracula, which featured a man bat in its opening credits. However, Finger did suggest a different costume direction for Batman. In an interview for Jim Steranko's History of the Comics, Volume 1, Finger described in detail the extent of his suggestions about the costume. He felt the original character, the Batman, looked too much like Superman with a mask and bat wings. He recommended replacing the Da Vinci inspired wings with a cape, giving him gloves, and changing the character's bodysuit from red to gray. Perhaps most importantly, Finger found a book with a picture of a bat in it and encouraged Kane to replace the character's domino mask with a more bat like hooded cowl, complete with ears, which would make the character distinguishable even in silhouette. It's generally agreed that Finger encouraged Kane to leave out the character's eyes when he wore the mask. Although Kane would accept many of these suggestions, one cannot escape the direct influence of Lee Falk's character, the Phantom, as Kane admitted that he studied newspaper strips on a routine basis. Finger wrote the first Batman script, while Kane provided art. Because Kane had already submitted the proposal for a Batman character to his editors at DC Comics, Kane was the only person given official credit at the time for the creation of Batman. This was not unusual in the comic books of that time, where the artist would often sign his name to the first page of the story and the script would be uncredited, but it was in contrast to other features on which Finger worked where he was identified as scripter, such as Wildcat and Green Lantern. And in contrast to the credits on features by the same publisher, such as Superman, where writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster both received credit during the time they were affiliated with the publisher, even on stories ghosted for them by other writers and artists. According to Wizard magazine, Bob Kane and Finger enter a work for hire contract. It is this contract that provided National and DC their strongest defense against later claims by Finger. Finger was a very meticulous writer and, as such, a slow one, leading editor Whitney Ellsworth to suggest that Kane replace him with someone else. During Finger's absence, Gardner Fox contributed scripts that introduced Batman's early Bat Arsenal, the utility belt, the Bat Gyro, plane, and the Batarang, some of the tech that he still has today. Upon his return, Finger created or co-created items such as the Batmobile and Batcave, and is credited with providing a name for Gotham City. Among the things that made his stories particularly distinctive was the use of giant-sized props, enlarged pennies, sewing machines, or typewriters. Kane and Finger brought together such diverse influences as pulp magazines, comic strips, film noir, and the slapstick comedy of teams like the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges, creating a cartoon noir that was widely imitated. Eventually, Fing- Eventually, Finger left Kane's studio to work directly for DC Comics, where he still supplied scripts for Batman, as well as many other characters. The supporting characters and villains. Batman was featured in solo adventures for nearly the first year since its creation. It was then that Kane and Finger decided to introduce a new character. Finger, who was the regular writer of the Batman comic, would find it difficult to write the stories when the main character had nobody to talk to, and thus they decided to create a partner for Batman, Robin. He was introduced in 1940 and he remained a constant character for the rest of Batman's history, even up until now. There's been like five Robins, maybe even more. Soon after Robin's introduction, many other characters were introduced to the Batman history, but instead of being supporting characters, they were all villains. Characters like Joker, Catwoman, and Hugo Strange debuted immediately after this. For years, these characters remained as the main cast, and they were soon followed by others like Penguin, Riddler, Two-Face, Scarecrow, and many other minor characters like Alfred Pennyworth, who is Batman's butler. Batman and his supporting cast remained unchanged for years until the late 1950s, in which many colorful characters were introduced. Among them were Batwoman, Ace the Bat-Hound, Batgirl, Bat-Knight, and several others that were created as caricatures of the main concept of Batman. However, their existence was short-lived and they were soon eliminated from the history of Batman. Evolution. In 1964, DC Comics introduced the new look of Batman. His costume was changed in order to feature a yellow oval slash circle surrounding the Batman insignia on the Batsuit. This new appearance also marked a change of direction in the Batman stories, which had been based around science fiction and fantasy elements. The new stories featured a more serious context, and they were often presented as mysteries and detective stories, as they did in the early days. A couple of years later, in 1966, the notorious Batman TV show premiered on national television, and the popularity of Batman increased to levels that were never reached before. As a result of the TV show, Batman was changed once again and became a friendlier version of himself. Unfortunately, the popularity of the Batman TV show didn't last long, and in 1968, it was cancelled. In 1970, Batman was transformed into a dark figure of the night, and his stories were based around murder mysteries and thrillers. However, and despite these changes, the general public was no longer interested in the character, and the Batman comic book reached historical low selling numbers in 1985. 1986, writer Frank Miller developed dark versions of Batman as an elder hero who returns to action after years of retirement. Batman: The Dark Knight Returns was set outside of the main DC Universe continuity, and it became the graphic novel that defined the Batman for the new generations. This version was much more psychologically complex, dark, gritty, and based on real situations, which made Batman a more feasible character. Soon, Miller was assigned to write the new origin for Batman in the regular continuity in Batman Year One. In 1988, writer Alan Moore created the shocking graphic novel Batman: The Killing Joke, which further defined Batman as a dark, menacing figure, as well as Joker's title of Batman's arch nemesis. Joker worked really hard for that title. Not long after this, Batman returned to the screens, but this time under Tim Burton's direction. Batman film of 1989 was a complete success, and Batman became once again one of the most popular figures in pop culture. After the success of the film, a new TV series started production, and Batman, the animated series, made its debut in 1992. It was around this time that the new characters were introduced into Batman history. Bane was a new villain who was capable of defeating Batman with catastrophic consequences. Harley Quinn was another new character who was adopted from the animated series due to her extreme popularity. In the early 2000s, a new film franchise was developed by Christopher Nolan, and Batman Begins revitalized the films of The Dark Knight. Its success allowed Nolan to develop the critically acclaimed sequels The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. A few years later, the Batman Arkham Asylum video game was released, and and became the most successful superhero video game along with its sequel, Batman Arkham City. I love both of these games. As his legacy keeps growing, Batman remains a mainstay figure for DC Comics as he has become the comic book character with the most films, TV series, and video games, as well as thousands of comics and hundreds of interpretations. And then up to this day, Batman is, from that time period on until now, basically one of the most popular superheroes ever in modern pop culture. And that is a brief history of Batman and his creation, who created him, who contributed what. And the credit goes to the DC database for the Batman publication history. Thanks for watching.